This video is about developing analytical writing with a particular focus on implications within analysis. Good analysis shows clear critical thinking. It considers the idea from differing perspectives and it's detailed and diverse. We're going to be looking at a particular model in this video, which is really going to help you plan out the structure of your paragraph and recognize how you can bring in greater detail and diversity into your writing in order to show a more complex understanding of an idea. This is the model, and it starts with the idea. We've talked before about ideas and how they're different to themes. Themes, of course, being single words like love or suffering, but the idea is more about what these things imply. So when we talk about an idea, it's usually more of a statement. Is love positive or negative? Well, an idea would dictate that to us, whereas love on its own as a theme doesn't really. Most ideas are created in the form of problems. If we look at a classic book like To Kill a Mockingbird, for example, it deals a lot with racism and discrimination, and of course it presents these things largely as problems. We see people being taken advantage of, we see people being treated like second-class citizens. All of these things are problems. So I guess the idea that we can see in this case is that racial discrimination is a negative thing. That's a problem. As we go into more sophisticated explorations of ideas, however, we go to recognise that good ideas have implied resolutions. Now, depending on the text, sometimes the resolution can be more obvious and sometimes it can be more subtle. For example, if you've ever looked at a tragedy, you'll know that it often ends in quite a negative note. Maybe everyone's dead, maybe people have broken up, maybe there's war going on, and you could think, oh, well, there is no positive resolution to this. But often in the case of a tragedy, it almost shows everything that can go wrong, and the implication is how things could have went better if these things didn't happen. So sometimes we emphasize a problem in order to reveal the resolution, which is to avoid the problem. We're going to improve the quality of the idea in another way, though, and that's what this video is all about. Looking at the problem to the resolution looks at the depth of the idea, realizing that it's not just about pointing out something that's wrong, but implying a possible solution to that problem that we can take away and change our life. When we consider implications, we're talking about going wider in the problem. And this is about showing that we have a more complex and detailed understanding of the problem and the different effects that it can have. I'm going to talk you through an example before I show you some examples of writing. If you've ever read The Crucible by Arthur Miller, you might know that it's all about religious practice. You've got people who are more concerned with the practice of their religion, which includes things like going to church, not working on a Sunday, not speaking in a certain way, kind of really particular kind of things. But they ignore some of the values that their religion is based on, which is supposed to be about things like forgiveness and acceptance and dignity and stuff like that. So an idea within that text is this concept that religious practice should not overshadow religious values. So it presents itself as a problem in this case. Because people do this, there's all these issues within there. The implied resolution to this problem is that society should be more just, fair, and tolerant. And we find ourselves sort of yearning for that throughout the text because we see so much corruption and injustice. But let's look at some of the implications of this idea. If we live in a world where religious practice is more important than religious values, now just to clarify, that means sort of what you do is more important than why you do it or the character of the person that you are. What are some of the things that we might see? Well, what we see within the text is manipulation, deceit, and corruption. This idea that because it matters more about what you do than who you are, we see characters in the book manipulating this system. So they spend all their time kind of pointing out the flaws in others. Oh, that person didn't come to church on Sunday. That person was caught working on the rest day. That person said this or said that. If we have a really strict religious practice where you get punished for missing simple things, that leads to deceit. People are more likely to lie because they don't want to get in trouble. Because there's no sense of forgiveness or tolerance or acceptance, people are more likely to lie and say, oh no, I am perfect. And of course, corruption becomes part of that as well. And what we find in that text is the people who are supposed to hold the highest religious moral regard are actually some of the most sinister, underhanded people who use that system for their own gain. On the other side, there's further implication. If I'm really strict in my approach, What are some of the other implications of that? Well, as I'm sure you can imagine, some people aren't going to be very happy with it. So that increases the likelihood that they're going to rebel against it. So an implication of really strong, specific rule sets that restrict people's freedom is an increased risk of rebellion. So on one side, you might have people manipulating that for their own gain, but on the other side, you might have people fighting back. And both of these things happen within the text. So what we can start to frame here is that this idea around religious practice has a number of components to it. It's not just this idea that, oh, this is bad, so therefore we should do this. We actually need to explore the idea more by saying, this is bad, and it's bad because the implications of this suggest that people are going to respond in different ways. And the more I can show that I've thought or used evidence to discuss what I've thought about those implications, the more detailed and critical my analysis is going to become. Let's look at this from a writing point of view now. When we look at the performance standards, aligned with the E is this language identification of an idea in a text. So I wonder what that would look like. Well, let's check out an example. In The Crucible, there is a lot of religion in the story, which shows how people live with religion. So they have identified an idea here, people live with religion. But think about what we just talked about in terms of problems, resolutions, and implications. Have they shown any of this? We can see that they've said people live with religion, but they haven't identified whether that's a problem or not. So they've been really vague in that regard. But as well as that, they also haven't suggested any implications or examples as to how this idea is represented and its implications within the text. The D standard, we see the language change in regards to the performance standard, knowledge and understanding of some ideas in a narrow range of texts. Let's look at an example. In The Crucible, there are a lot of people who like and dislike religion. Some people think that being religious all the time is really good. Other people think that some parts of religion are okay, but others aren't as important. We're seeing a knowledge and understanding of some ideas. They've fleshed out the idea more. It's not just about the fact that people live with religion, but it's actually identifying or hinting that there's a problem here because people have differing perspectives on the value of religion. There's something there that needs to be resolved. Now, in this case, we say it's a narrow range of texts because they haven't offered any evidence to substantiate what they're saying. They haven't recognised any implications or perspectives. It's quite a simple presentation of the idea. Once we get to the C, you'll notice how the language changes. Previously, it talked about a narrow range of text, but now it doesn't use that word anymore. It says perspectives, knowledge and understanding of some ideas and perspectives in text. So we're going to look at the same idea, look at how they frame it. In The Crucible, the idea of reliance on religion is explored throughout the novel. Miller suggests that if we are too black and white about our perspective, then it is really easy to start finding fault and blaming people over insignificant details. Reverend Parris is an example of this because he thinks that anyone who has sinned should be punished. So we can see in comparison to the D, the idea is much clearer here, and even the way that they've worded it is clearer. But then there's more explanation as to why this is a problem. The problem is if we are too black and white about our perspective, then it's easy to start finding fault over insignificant things. So it's unpacked the idea and it's conveyed the problem more clearly, and it's implied the solution to that problem. It's also given a specific example, so it's given some perspectives. Reverend Parris is a character, and this is his perspective. So we can see it's building in its complexity. As we go to the B, the main thing that changes is we lose that word some. Before we talked about some ideas and perspectives, and now we're just talking about ideas and perspectives. I'm sure you can imagine that the key difference that we're looking to see is more implications, a stronger understanding of the idea here. And when it says a range of texts, what it really means is a range of areas within the text. I shouldn't just take one example from one context within the book. I should consider a range of evidence. In The Crucible, Miller illustrates that religious practice should not overshadow the values on which this practice is based. Miller illustrates how an unflinching reliance on daily routine should not impact the strength of one's character or their entitlement to redemption. We see this reinforced through a number of perspectives within the text, such as Reverend Parris, who implies that the simple act of missing meeting or ploughing on a Sunday are condemnable offences, which is in stark contrast to John Proctor, who suggests that honesty and integrity are better measures of an individual's goodness. So we've got two perspectives where previously we had one. So before we were looking at some perspectives, now we're looking at perspectives. But we're drawing that from across the text. So that's more aligned with the B. Last one is the A standard, and of course you can see here the key word is comprehensive. The only difference between the B and the A is this word comprehensive. So the key question is, what does comprehensive mean? Well, ultimately, it's about a greater level of depth, detail, and a greater level of diversity. So in The Crucible, Miller illustrates that religious ideology should transcend the mundane practice of day-to-day living. Miller draws a parallel to the political witch hunt of the 1950s by suggesting that when justice systems focus on stereotypical expectations of practice and ignore the importance of human character, that they compromise their integrity. Just think about how they framed the problem in this case with more specificity, and they've even contextualized a little bit more in terms of the setting of the book. We see this idea reinforced a number of times through the text as characters such as John Proctor stand up against corruption by actively rebelling against the courts, while subtler characters such as Reverend Hale communicate their distaste with the system by refusing to contribute to the judicial corruption of the courts. Again, there's an implication there. If I make really strong rules, I'm very likely to get some people who are going to rebel against me, but I'm also possibly going to get people who are going to withdraw, or they're going to leave, or just refuse to contribute. Furthermore, we see the way that the reliance on routine reveals opportunities for corruption and manipulation, which further compromises the importance of integrity, as opportunistic characters such as Paris and Abigail use the disregard for morality as a means to further their own position or agenda. So we've identified another implication here. One of the implications is that we get rebellion. Another one is that we essentially get submission, or people pulling out. The other thing is we get people manipulating or corrupting the system for their own gain. So these are three implications in which we can see this idea generates. In each case, we see how the action of ignoring moral character in the pursuit of justice causes focus within a society to shift to blame and corruption rather than achieving fairness and security. So just notice in this case, we talk about the resolution here. So what does this really teach us? Well, it teaches us that if we choose to act like this, then we lose what is important, which is fairness and security. So the takeaway is not the negative. The takeaway is about what this teaches us and how we can move forward with that knowledge. To make this better, I would include quotes from the text to substantiate the idea. I might resolve the paragraph. These are not full paragraphs. These are extracts from paragraphs. I wouldn't just share that evidence. I'd kind of discuss a little bit more to make that point and that resolution clearer. Make sure that the idea in discussion has connection and evolution across paragraphs. So the other point I make here is if you're writing as part of an essay, the connection between your points is also important, and we haven't discussed that in this video either. But hopefully you've taken away some key tips that will help you move forward and improve the quality of your analysis in the future.